This is Dr. Caroline Peterson and Natural Women's Health Institute in Sarasota, Florida. Today I'm talking about serotonin and digestion. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. It is in the central nervous system and also in the peripheral nervous system or the enteric nervous system. It has the quality of helping you to feel happy and calm when it's in a proper amount. At least that's the way we used to think of it. We used to think like more amount based. It's probably not the best way to think about it. And it's also associated with seasonal affective disorder, depression, and anxiety. So this huge meta-analysis came out in 2022 that said we're actually kind of like thinking of serotonin in the wrong way, and that there's no good evidence that low serotonin is what produces depression. Although that's the way we're used to like thinking about it and talking about it. And so now we have to kind of like change our language, change the way that we talk about things, and actually create some space for not exactly understanding how the how serotonin affects mood. We do know that it's a regulatory hormone for more than just mood, that it involves sleep, GI motility, and the immune system, and it has to do with metabolism and growth. Serotonin is not only in people, it's in other mammals, worms, insects, and even plants and fungi. It is the thing in some insects and plants that causes the venom to be painful. So that's makes sense because some of the bowel conditions associated with serotonin are associated also with pain, with abdominal pain. And so serotonin has the capacity to cause pain. It's made out of an amino acid named tryptophan, and it is produced separately in the brain and the gut. It cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, so there have to be separate areas of creation. Tryptophan, that amino acid, the building block of protein, is one of the amino acids that your body can't make, so you have to eat it. And you get it from milk, other forms of dairy, meat, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and beans. So here's L-tryptophan that gets changed by an enzyme, which is also called a gene, into 5-HTP, which is over the counter in the United States, a precursor for serotonin. 5-HT is the shortcut name for serotonin. This gene or enzyme TPH that breaks down L-tryptophan into 5-HTP, it has two different varieties, one for the enterochromaffin cells in the small intestine where most of the serotonin in the body is made, and then another form, TPH2, which is in the central nervous system and then the enteric nervous system. So there's a couple different pathways for making serotonin in the body. So I just mentioned those enterochromaffin cells that make the serotonin in the body. These are in the lining of the intestine, and they're kind of like turned on or activated if there's mechanical stimulation or chemical stimulation, that especially related to like eating, right? So that's one of the things that will cause more serotonin to be created. So um, when the central nervous system is activated, so the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, and peristaltic and secretory reflexes begin, there's a mechanical stimulation that causes serotonin to be released. And then that in turn will activate the nerves that are related to continuing the peristaltic action in the gut. So serotonin has multiple functions in the gut. Um, it is involved with inhibiting gastric acid secretion and stimulating mucus secretion and increasing gut motility. Serotonin is not the only thing that influences gut motility. Acetylcholine actually has the biggest influence. And then to slow down gut motility, we have the nitric oxide, the vasoactive intestinal peptide VIP, and then the pituitary adenylate cyclase activating peptide. So it's really a lot of things coming together to influence gut motility. The enterochromaffin cells get messages about how to maintain the serotonin levels from the gut bacteria. The gut bacteria, in turn, can also participate in synthesizing serotonin, particularly these three varieties. Fatty acids and biliary acids also give information to the EC cells about when to create and release serotonin and how much to release. So it's really a whole symphony. Inflammatory bowel syndrome is now pretty uniformly considered to be related to serotonin. So it affects about 5 to 10% of otherwise healthy people and is associated with abdominal pain and either diarrhea or constipation. It is also associated with anxiety and depression and is more common in young women. So this is how it works. Pretty much you see we've got a background setting of dysbiosis. We're eating the tryptophan, and let's say we go up here to the top dysbiosis. In this type of dysbiosis, we have microbial species that upregulate the serotonin pathway. That means the EC cells and genes that break down the tryptophan are more activated. The SERT, which is a serotonin transporter, has decreased activation. So there's more exposure to serotonin in the system. This means that because there's more exposure to serotonin, there's increased gut motility. And of course, more serotonin means more inflammation. And so this is what causes the diarrhea, the IBS diarrhea. Now, let's say we go the other way. Let's say we have the diet, and then we, of course, are eating the tryptophan. It gets broken down in this dysbiotic environment where you have microbes that downregulate serotonin pathway. This will then cause less enterochromaffin cell serotonin production, less breakdown of tryptophan into serotonin, and increased activation of serotonin transport so that there's actually like less serotonin in the system. And this will lead to constipation and decreased gut motility. Isn't that interesting? So when we have too much serotonin, we can get more inflammation, more pain, more the faster motility, and then that's the diarrhea. If we have the constipation, then that is related to the having fewer species, microbial species that upregulate the serotonin pathway and more species that downregulate the serotonin pathway. So less serotonin production leads to constipation. So the organisms that downregulate serotonin and lead to constipation are the Bifidobacterium longum, the Lactobacillus acidophilus, the Bifidobacterium pseudolongum, and the Lactobacillus rhamnosus. So these bacteria are awesome for other situations. Like it'd be great if you had diarrhea. These would be ones that would be awesome to take. But if you have constipation, then these are ones that you probably want to kind of steer clear of. Another reason that people can get constipation that's related to serotonin is if they have certain alleles that are present. So the serotonin transporter P has one polymorphism that has the SS or the short allele. And another one is the long allele or the long short allele. So there's always like three different choices or so. So in postmenopausal women, you do best on an SSRI if you have at least the long short allele rather than the short. The short is associated with constipation. And so estrogen seems to play a part of these SSRIs and serotonin because postmenopausal women get less benefit from antidepressant treatment than women of reproductive age. Now we want to look at the pathways, the shared pathways for tryptophan, which are serotonin and the kynurenine pathways. So here we have tryptophan, and tryptophan has to either choose if it's going to come over this way to become serotonin, or if it's going to become pulled over this way to become kynureninic acid. So what makes that happen? So if here we have tryptophan, the kynurenine pathway is the one that we want it to go down is this kynureninic acid. That's neuroprotective. That's optimal. If we get pulled down into the quinolinic acid pathway part of it, that's neurotoxic. That's highly inflammatory. And so that's the one that we don't want to go down. For serotonin, this is going through all of the different cofactors that help us to actually break tryptophan down into serotonin and then into melatonin so that we can sleep and do other stuff. So you can see that we need the B vitamins, we need iron, we need vitamin D, we need fish oil, we need SAMe from the methylation cycle in order to make this serotonin happen. So tryptophan is actually used preferentially or mostly by the kynurenine pathway, and only 5% goes to be metabolized in the serotonin pathway. When we have IBS-D or diarrhea, that means that more of the tryptophan is being pulled into the serotonin pathway. This has to do a lot of times with the breakdown of serotonin into 5-HIAA. That's one of the metabolites. And this will also be associated with anxiety and the abdominal pain. So here's the tryptophan. We're getting broken down into serotonin. And then there's a choice, where are we going to break? See, 1, 2, 3, 4 different pathways that we can break serotonin down into. So if we break it down into this one here, 5-HIAA, this is the one that leads to anxiety and abdominal pain and diarrhea. And so this is the one that's sped up. This MAO-A, this is the one that's more commonly upregulated in women. And when you have inflammation, this is going to speed up. So you're just going to get, suctioned off into this 5-HIAA and tend to get the diarrhea and the anxiety and the abdominal pain. So now for the IBS-C, the preference is given for the breakdown of tryptophan into that neurotoxic quinolinic pathway. And this is the pathway that's associated with depression, constipation, depression. So these TDO, IDO, these are genes. Genes are enzymes. They do work. They break down. They break down one product into another product. So here's tryptophan. If we have high cortisol, high inflammation, then tryptophan is not going to want to produce serotonin, the mellow, happy neurotransmitter, the thing that helps with digestion. It's more like 911. I need to I need to do the basics. And so it's going to get pulled over. These genes are going to speed up. They're going to pull us over here, and we're going to go down the neurotoxic pathway. And then this neurotoxic pathway is going to activate NMDA. NMDA. This is the glutamate mimic that works on the glutamate receptors. So glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. We need excitatory neurotransmitters. That's good. There's nothing wrong with being an excitatory neurotransmitter. We need that. But it also needs to stop being excitatory. It needs to be broken down into GABA, which is like a mellow, the primary mellow neurotransmitter. So I was saying before, this NMDA mimics the action of glutamate on the glutamate receptor. And so it kind of like heightens activation. It's excitatory itself. Now, ketamine works on that NMDA receptor. It's an antagonist, and it's used to treat depression. And so when people use ketamine and they get some improvement in their symptoms, they're really working this pathway in part. The other thing that happens, let's see here. So here's tryptophan. This is a presynaptic neuron. Here we got tryptophan. So this is serotonin. Gets broken down into serotonin. Then serotonin is going to be broken down by this mono amino oxidase A, for instance, in the periphery, B in the brain. And if there is this is going to be increased in the presence of inflammation. This gene is going to work double time, triple time, many, many times faster in the presence of inflammation, so that you just like are whisking serotonin through the system, so it doesn't really have a chance to be active there. So you're degrading it very, very quickly. And so you have more of it broken down more quickly. You have less serotonin in the synaptic cleft. And so you have problems with depression. This is related to inflammation. And the inflammation that was being studied in this study was related to histamine. So inflammation pushes tryptophan down the neurotoxic quinolinic acid pathway rather than serotonin or the chirinic acid pathway, which is neuroprotective. This leads to less serotonin production and less neuroprotection. Inflammation also speeds up the breakdown of serotonin by MAO-A, MAO-A, so there is even less available serotonin. And this is related in part to histamine, which is inflammatory in nature and causes a decrease in serotonin. So stress creates less serotonin. Stress creates more cortisol. High stress leads to the pregnenolone steal. We got another steal. So this is the adrenal gland. Here we have cholesterol is the building block for all steroidal hormones. It's broken down into pregnenolone. Pregnenolone then is broken down into the other steroidal hormones, whether it's progesterone, cortisol, and here these ones are broken down into estrogen and testosterone. So if there's a limited building blocks, the idea is that the body will pull the building blocks more towards the cortisol rather than the other steroidal hormones. And so that we're trying to deal with the 911 situation instead of procreation, for instance. So we prioritize the production of cortisol over the production of progesterone, estrogen, testosterone when stressed. SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. This is a very, very common medication to treat depression and other psychiatric disorders. What the SSRI does is it inhibits the gene, which is an enzyme called SERT, which is the serotonin transporter at the presynaptic terminal, so that serotonin stays in the synaptic cleft longer and does more work there. So here we have the serotonin terminal. This is the synapse, and here's serotonin. What's supposed to happen is that serotonin goes out of the terminal into the receptor back, and it's kind of like this recycling thing. And so with the SSRI, then it's gonna block the serotonin so that it stays in this cleft longer. There's less reuptake of the serotonin, so that you have more activation. So the SSRIs and other drugs in that category were developed based on the monoamine hypothesis that says that there's a deficiency of serotonin, and that's what causes depression. However, this does not appear to be panning out. When people take SSRIs, about 16% of them get diarrhea. This kind of makes sense because that means you're getting more exposure to serotonin. Serotonin increases gut motility. And so it makes sense that some people would get diarrhea. However, 11 to 12% experience constipation. So this has a different mechanism. So what SSRIs do is not only work on the serotonin receptors, they also work on the acetylcholine receptors, which are called muscarinic receptors. Particularly M2 is the one that the SSRIs block. That means that they decrease acetylcholine activation. And acetylcholine is even more important than serotonin is for gut motility. And so the SSRIs block acetylcholine action. And that's why in some people, they're gonna have constipation. So serotonin has a bunch of different receptors. The SSRI works on two of them. 5-HT means serotonin. So it's a serotonin 2A and 2C receptor. Those are the receptors that SSRIs work on. Then the acetylcholine receptors there's 5 of those. But really it's the M2, the one that we're more interested in. So acetylcholine is part of the parasympathetic nervous system. So that means that its receptors are also part of the parasympathetic nervous system. So when these receptors, the muscarinic receptors, are overactivated, that is associated with depression, and particularly at the M2, which is the same one in the gut that the SSRI impacts. So here we have the type 1. This is like the juicy one receptor that's associated with juicy things. Type 2, this is, I mean, there are a lot of different places, right? But type 2 is the one that we're thinking more about the gut. So they're they're everywhere. So all 5 muscarinic receptors are in the gut, but mostly M3 and M2, and really mostly M2. M2 has 4-to-1 ratio, M2 to M3, 4-to-1, M2, 4 M2 to 1 M3. So really there's a lot more M2 than anything else in the gut. So just as kind of like a review, M2 receptor is a dominant cholinergic receptor, acetylcholine receptor in the gut. SSRIs can bind to it. Acetylcholine is part of the parasympathetic system and promotes gut motility. If the M2 receptor is blocked in the gut, this will decrease gut motility and promote constipation. When the M2 receptor is blocked, that is associated with depression. So in summary, serotonin is associated with irritable bowel syndrome and can express either as constipation or diarrhea, dependent on the microbiome, stress, inflammation, and genetic SNPs. The treatment is to balance the microbiome, tame inflammation, come into parasympathetic dominance by slowing down and enjoying life.